AT&T Tower. So I think the easiest way, first, why don't we introduce everybody that's here, just so that we all know. I'm Dick Wilcox, I'm chairman of the select board. You're going to go that way?
We'll do the town first. Sarah Tully, town administrator.
Bill Douglas, planning commission. Scott Bradley, select board.
Gary Seal, planning commission.
Fred Bagley, planning commission.
Justin Lindholm, planning commission.
Chris Boda, I'm the property owner.
Neil Smith, Centcon.
David R. Shambo with Virtual Site Simulation.
And Will Dodge, Downs Rockland Martin, representing AT&T.
So Terry Crisson is the chair of our planning commission, will also be coming in late, but when she arrives, that's who she is.
Very good.
So at this point, well, why don't you?
Yeah, you gonna do it? Okay. Is it okay if we turn off the light? What I was doing before that I thought was working pretty well is if we turn this one on and that one off, then I think people can still see their notes, but they might see the slideshow a little more clearly. Thank you again for scheduling this meeting. I think we were prepared to come in on Monday, but this works so much better to have the planning commission and a member of the select board here, so we really appreciate it. And let me say at the outset that I feel as though while we generally, when we're representing AT&T, try to pride ourselves on communications, I definitely will say that I feel like along the way in this process so far, the communications have gotten a little bit botched. So what we're here to do tonight is both try to explain some of the issues that were raised in the February 10th letter, and where we want to get to sort of as a goal is to try to figure out how to best schedule a balloon test so that residents of Mendon can see the proposed impact, but also for us to make sure that we provide you with some of the visual simulations that you're looking for and ultimately move to the public hearing. So we're not going to explain every aspect of the whole facility today, but just to start out with, I think what I'll do is just give you a real quick overview to remind you generally of why we're here, then talk about the letter, talk about what we call the location review, which is basically looking at the list on the February 10th letter of all the 911 addresses that were given to us and what we've concluded about that. And I'll explain more why both Janelle and Dave have their laptops open in addition to mine in case there's specific things we want to look at today up on the screen. Then we'll talk a little bit about the grant of license, which is the document that we proposed for owners to allow Dave's team to go onto their properties and take pictures during the balloon test, if that's something they request. And then I think, hopefully, if your questions are addressed, then I think it makes sense to talk about scheduling to get us to that next stage.
Okay, what we had anticipated, how long a presentation are you guessing?
Not very long. I mean, I would say maybe, it's really as long as...
I guess my question is, do you want questions as you go, or do you want to wait till
Yes,
you're done?
I feel like we've got a small, intimate enough group today that we should just do questions as we go, unless anybody has any objection to that.
That's great.
That would be fine by Isaac. So the last time that we were here, we actually showed a little movie about what FirstNet is. I'm not prepared to do that today, although we have it if we really want to take a look at it. But one of the things that we will present at a public hearing is why is AT&T here at this particular time? And basically, a lot of that comes down to FirstNet. FirstNet, loosely stated, is the federal agency that was created in response to the 9/11 Commission to ultimately build a nationwide network where first responders, whether they be local, state, regional, national, even international, not only have great access to wireless spectrum so that they can use all kinds of different tools, not just handheld devices, but a myriad of tools for law enforcement, for public safety, but also that in the case of an emergency, the spectrum that they have allocated is reserved specifically for public safety. So if you have a situation where, for instance, and let's just say, God forbid this should happen, but if there were some type of major crisis here in Mendon, like Hurricane Irene, that if everyone started to use their phones at once, the idea of FirstNet is that they're reserving and putting priority for first responders to be able to communicate, and also for emergency communications to get through. So that's just a nutshell of why we're here. What happened is FirstNet figured out that we're not going to be able to build a nationwide network ourselves. We're going to put it out to bid. There was a ferocious bidding contest between T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, other carriers, and ultimately AT&T won out. And part of the reason that they did that is because the federal government said, well, we're going to put in $90 billion for you to build this network, and AT&T said, well, we'll put in $90 billion too. So that way, what you're getting out of the overall expansion is not only FirstNet capabilities, but an expansion of AT&T's network. So the way that it works is that in different towns and different municipalities, first responders will subscribe, if AT&T convinces them to use the network. They can still use Verizon if they want, but more and more what we're finding is the number of subscriptions is going up and up across the country. And that's true here in Vermont as well. So just generally speaking, going more specifically to Mendon, we're building a number of different sites all through the state. The site in Mendon, which you can see right here with my laser pointer, this is where we propose to put the site. And you can see all the stars around here in Killington, in Rutland and West Rutland, a little bit up in Pittsburgh, just illustrates that we have no site in Mendon presently. There is AT&T coverage, like right here in this building and in certain areas, but overall it's not terribly good. It's unreliable and spotty. Where it's really spotty though is up in Chittenden. Chittenden is one of the real problems, and what you'll see is, and actually let me try to illustrate it better this way. So again, here's where we're proposing to put the site on the CV Mendon property, and you can see that all these green areas are basically places where you have outdoor AT&T coverage in the area. You can see that there's some big gaps along Route 4, and there's sort of spottiness here and there. But up on Chittenden Road, and to some degree over here in Pittsburgh, we definitely have a lot of holes. The purpose of the site that we're proposing is to fill a lot of that in as best we can. So we're going to get new coverage up by Chittenden Road, like about another 2 miles, 1.5 miles along Holden Road. We're going to get a piece of West Creek Road over here, and ultimately providing coverage in the general area for about 1,500 residents. So then that's determined based on the Census Bureau and looking at what buildings are there. This will also include about a half mile of new coverage along Route 4 to fill some of those holes that we have today. So really because of the geography, both of where the town boundaries are as well as the topography, that's why we have a site in Mendon that is both helping out in Mendon but also addressing the coverage gaps that we have in Chittenden. And finally, and oddly enough, like coming down on Chittenden Road, you can see as clearly when you're coming toward Mendon why it is that we need to be there and can't easily be elsewhere in Chittenden.
So can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So why would this map be different than the AT&T sales map that's on the website?
The sales map is showing what is currently existing, and I would say is optimistic. In other words, that it is trying to, it's ultimately trying to show where either coverage exists or where it's anticipated. This is done not only verified by AT&T engineers, it's actually done by an independent company that verifies what it is that we have today and what we will have in the future, called C-Squared. They would actually, our proposal is that they would come to the public hearing when we have that to explain.
So AT&T advertises that they have coverage in 96% of Vermont at this time. So, and Mendon is completely covered in blue, which was their coverage area. So are you saying that AT&T is deceptive in their advertising?
No, I'm certainly not saying that. I haven't seen any of the ads that you're talking about. I've never actually heard that claim.
It's just looking at their coverage map from their website.
Okay.
So
But
we're trying to determine where that lack of coverage is.
well, what I would encourage you to do is to look at the Department of Public Services website, because they actually went and did their own independent mapping of every service provider's coverage. There's what's called the drive test map on the department's website, and you can look at that to the extent that you have concerns about what's on the AT&T
We're
website.
just trying to find facts.
Well, what I'm telling you is that this is independently verified by RF engineers who are gonna be here to basically testify, and we testify before the Public Utility Commission about what the coverage areas, where the coverage gaps are and what'll be remedied.
So the coverage that you're showing is strictly AT&T.
Correct.
It doesn't have anything to do with Verizon's coverage.
That's correct. That's correct. Now, it's possible that Verizon would want to co-locate on this tower. The tower that we will build will have other slots on it so that T-Mobile or Verizon or anybody else could put antennas basically below AT&T center line. AT&T goes on a lot of towers where Verizon is at the top and will go right below them. Like, for instance, we're doing one in Leicester now that it was just approved. I think another one in Ludlow. So that happens frequently. And that may or may not happen here. It really depends. All the carriers are not on the same towers. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. It just depends on where the network is. And each of the technologies is a little bit different. So that's why you don't have a perfect overlap in every part of the state or of the whole region.
Does that coverage include that narrow bandwidth that you described that had to be reserved, or is this all bandwidths?
No, it does. It's basically the AT&T frequencies are going to be what's reserved for used and reserved for FirstNet. So in other words, there's no distinction between new AT&T coverage and new FirstNet coverage.
So the half mile on Route 4 would be for commercial bandwidth as well as the restricted
Correct.
FirstNet bandwidth.
So it means that you won't drop a call as easily as you might. And whether you drop a call on Route 4 depends a lot of the time on what else is going on around you. How many other people are using their phones? Is it leaf on or leaf off conditions? All of these things affect coverage. And I'm not a radio frequency engineer, but we will have one here to explain that to the extent that you have more questions about that.
Thank you.
So that's a general overview of the facility. I think what we want to talk about is a response to the Select Board's letter. What happened when we originally were working on this site? What happened is the AT&T radio frequency engineers picked a spot that they thought would work best from a radio frequency perspective without actually visiting the site themselves. And this often happens. It's done that way simply because we have so much terrain to cover. We're trying to deal with all of northern New England, and so there was kind of an initial assessment made of where would be the ideal spot. And that was basically the coordinates that are included on the photo simulations that we submitted. Originally, the site was projected to be 180 feet tall. So we ended up doing a view shed and photo simulations, and part of the reason that we did that is because we wanted to see for ourselves, what is this going to look like, even before we submitted the 60-day notice. The balloon, this is actually a typo on my end. It says that the balloon was flown. Well, do you want to explain about how the balloon was flown? We flew at two heights. Is that correct?
No, we
Just
flew at the
one-
180, and
Yeah.
then we ended up redoing the simulations to
Okay.
show the 140. You want to do what we do kind of thing?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we're hired typically because the towns and cities and jurisdictions require some kind of balloon float, photo simulations, and or a view shed analysis. On a balloon float, we're given a latitude and longitude, and we go to that place, and whatever the height of the tower is requested at that time, we fly a 3-foot balloon, red balloon, at that height. We use pre-measured braided line that is pre-measured so that we don't have to try to use a tape measure or try to get a laser reading on the balloon, though we quite often use a laser just to confirm things. We put the balloon up, we secure it, and then we drive around within a mile just about every road and look for the balloon. We have almost always have done some sort of a view shed so that our guy who is actually driving around taking the pictures has an idea of where it should be visible and where it shouldn't be visible. And we make sure that we really go to those places and take pictures from there. We do not go on private property unless we have written permission to go on private property. It's unfortunately in the world, it's an insurance requirement from our insurance company. But once there's written, we've gone, taken pictures from inside people's houses before, under different circumstances. We take those pictures back to our shop where the pictures and the cameras themselves are encoded with metadata, which shows where the picture was taken, and shows the direction of the picture, and it, when we put it into our program, it geolocates the address. So you might see the picture taken in the middle of the road and an address of one main street, where it might be right across the street is 2 Main Street, and if a phone call was made from that location, the police on 911, they would get the same address, geolocated. We use the same kind of system that gets the address. So every once in a while, the addresses look a little weird, but it's the way it's done. Then we take a 3D model of what is planned to be built, and we use an actual 3D model so that as we move it back and forth in distance, all dimensions of the model stay the same. In the old days, you used to take a picture and put it into a picture, but as you made it smaller and larger, the proportions don't normally stay the same. If you ever try to enlarge something from the side, you see it gets wide and fat. If you don't get the corner and do it, and even then the proportions don't go right. So by using a 3D model, all the proportions are right. We know that the balloon is 3 foot, so if the shaft of the tower is 3 foot, it's easy to make that transition. Then we map out, as you see here, where the pictures were taken, and green means that it's visible, red means it's not visible, and quite often you'll see yellow where it's obstructed, especially during the winter months where you can see it through a tree with no leaves on the tree. That dot would be yellow as obstructed, because you can see it, but you really, during the summer you probably wouldn't, but you can make that determination for yourself. On each picture itself, it gives you the geolocated address, the latitude and longitude, and the distance from the site, so that you have all of that information also. We typically won't fly a balloon at 10 mile an hour or higher winds. We prefer to do it under 5 mile an hour winds, especially when you're talking about a large hill here, even at the forecasted area being 5 mile an hour for the area, the top of that hill could see significantly higher winds.
So that gives you kind of an overview of the process. What happened here was, once we had done the initial viewshed analysis, which is included in those 60-day packages, but before we'd actually sent the 60-day packages, we actually revised the location. So you can see there's the original, and here's the other one. Here is where we're proposing it now, and this is done pursuant to what's called a 1A analysis. So this is a surveyed set of coordinates that's roughly about 500 feet, or 481.74 feet according to Google Earth, but roughly 500 feet to the south east of the original location. Now, what was the reason for that? So the first was constructability. What we determined through the subsequent site visits, is that this area where the original site was located is filled with boulders as well as ledge, and it would have been almost impossible to build in that location. So we came up to a much flatter area where there's less boulders, much more to work with. It's a slightly higher elevation, which then led us to start asking our radio frequency engineers, not just for this site, but for several other sites, can't we lower it? In other words, why do we need to be at 180? The state statute 248A says that a site that is no greater than 140 feet is what's called a site of limited size and scope, subject to meeting certain other requirements. And we said, why don't we try to see if 140 will work? And the radio frequency engineers came back, ran it, and said, yes, this will work. This will still get us into Chittenden and Pittsburgh and Mendon. So that ultimately resulted in the shift in location. And what happened then is we included in the actual submission that we sent, the 60-day notice, the proposed tower that we're seeking is 140 feet, not 180. But the photo simulations were still from that original location with the higher height. So the reason that we ultimately included those is we wanted you to at least see sort of what we were seeing generally, but with the understanding that we knew that you would want, in part because it's in the ordinance, your own balloon test that we would try to control. So to the extent there was confusion about that, and part of that was just either, I would say just a lack of clarity on our part, we're hoping that we can change that going forward by explaining all of this in a supplement. That's usually what we've done on multiple projects, is once you're moving forward in the process to supplement and provide more material. The other thing that I would say is that at this point in the process, we have a lot more information. We have a radio frequency report that the residents in the town would get. We have environmental information in the form of what's called a NEPA report, a National Environmental Policy Act, that talks about the natural resource impacts. So all of those materials we would propose in the next go-round, if you will, and the next time that we send out a supplement, that would all be included for the town's review and for our discussion at the subsequent public hearing.
Is the 1747-foot elevation the new location?
Yes, that's correct.
So
Right? Is that right, Dave? Did you show that on
The elevation,
the AMSL?
I saw it on a previous slide.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right. And that's in the drawings. That's in the drawings.
The drawing says 1758.
Oh, the 1747, I think, may have been from
The original one?
From the original.
Yeah,
So
it's
not
lower, it's lower than that, it's about 1730 something.
well, for where the compound is. or
Where
for
your
where the
original
tower
one is. You can tell by the difference in the elevations, those are 20-foot lines for elevation. You
Right.
came up quite a bit.
The 1A, bear with me for 1 second, I think the 1A is the AMSL. Yes, the 1A is, has the same coordinates as what's on the drawing. So the drawings are correct.
Right. The engineering drawings are correct.
Correct.
The simulation drawings are wrong, both of them.
Right, because they were using the original coordinates. So again, what we would propose to do is send out, and this is a 2-mile view shed. This is using the correct coordinates, showing in much more accurate terms where the sources of visibility are going to be. And they're not dramatically different from what we had on the original. We're showing a much broader section and keeping in mind that even though this is just as orange as something that's along Route 4, you're going to see it much less the further you go. That's not a difficult principle to understand.
So what is the elevation of the new location in your 1A application then?
Yes, it is. Bear with me for a second.
I'm pulling up the 1A survey.
Yeah, do you have that right
Yeah,
there?
September 30th, 2019.
And is that from somebody at the site, or is that just, or is that off the
Former
top of the
civil
map?
engineer.
That's Du Bois and King, where you probably had applications before from them.
So Du Bois and King
verified it
verified it, okay.
at the site.
It's not just a computer
No,
impression
exactly,
from the
exactly.
top of the map.
Exactly.
Yeah, it says 1758 on page 1 of Du Bois and King's drawings.
1758 ground elevation.
Yeah, so 1758 is the correct elevation.
So the slide that you had about 3 or 4 slides back, the view shed showing where the red dots were, that was taken in August.
Right.
is this next one gonna be in the wintertime when the leaves are?
That's what we would like to do. That's why I said at the outset, we would really like to schedule this balloon test for March before the leaves all start coming in. So that we can see it with leaf off conditions. And then you'll have a little bit of both, right? Even though the first one was not in exactly the right location, it's still probative, but we're gonna have a much more accurate test this time around.
I mean, jumping ahead here, but if you shorten the tower by 40 feet, does that mean the diameter of the tower at 140, not of the pods, but the diameter of the shaft at 140 is significantly less than the diameter would have been if the shaft at 180?
No, not really.
It's just a matter of inches or hardly at all?
It's really just the vertical feet that changes.
So the diameter...
The diameter's still the same.
Somewhat conical, right?
And keep in mind, because of the, well, here, so this is sort of what a typical monopole looks like, right? It's slightly greater at the base, slightly shorter at the top. It's usually like maybe 3 or 4 antennas standing off from the mount with some type of an array. So now there's things that you can do, and we can talk about down the road with the array itself, like painting the antennas brown, that sort of thing, or looking at trees. That's not beyond the realm of possibility, but what my little mini warning is let's not jump to a tree before we see what's actually out there, because the worst thing in the world is a community says, let's go for a monopine, and then everyone can see it because it's not well hidden or there's nothing behind it, and eventually you become the laughing stock, like many communities, especially in New Hampshire, less so in Vermont, but in New Hampshire there's a lot of towns that have regretted that decision.
And no guy wires?
No guy wires, it's all self-support as it's called.
2 questions. Not to be argumentative, but is there an apology in there somewhere about giving us wrong information?
Well, I think I did say that earlier, that yes, I regret that, for sure. Again, I do think that we were trying to communicate to you that we wanted to sit down and do this together.
As we said in the letter, it took considerable time here in the town to discover the errors and then try to figure out. So I appreciate the explanation.
Right, and I understand, and I think in hindsight, I'm pretty sure that we had said, let's do that we had asked you to give us the addresses and come back with an analysis, but I understand that you wanted to independently verify it. So that I will take responsibility for, and I regret that you spent all that time. So what I'm hoping to do today, if we can go...
Second question. Yep. We've asked repeatedly about computer-generated photos of instead of a balloon, what the tower would actually look like. Is that possible?
That is what we do. We use the
We
balloon.
didn't do it in the 60-day notice.
We use a balloon for location.
Yeah?
Then we take a 3D model and put that into the picture.
It's not in the picture.
Yeah, they are in the picture, where it was visible. If you go back to those dots right there, where the photos are green, like number 3 and number 7, you'll get over there in the picture from, I think that one's a mile away.
I'm pretty sure this
That's what you would see from a mile away.
So this is right off
That's
of
a 3D model of a tower put in the picture.
That's 0.8 of a mile there, and I have noticed that you can distinctly see the cans at 1 mile, and I need glasses. I would like to have you people send us simulations you've done in advance on another site and what the tower looked like after it was built. I'd like to see both, so I can go down and check it out. But at 1 mile, I've gone all over this place around here the last few days, and at 1 mile you can distinctly see every can and the distinct outline. Look at that. That's 0.8 of a mile. That is not good. I've been involved in simulations for many years in creating them and figuring them out. That's why we found all these mistakes you people have made. And they don't make us happy when we see these kind of mistakes. I've only found one mistake on the simulations, about 5 different simulations that we've reviewed. We've got a list of them.
If I'm not mistaken, this is the first time that I've been in the room with the planning commission member, so I greatly appreciate that. Again, I'm going to say what I said again at the outset. I feel like the communication here has not worked well so far, and I regret that because we've worked with multiple other communities all through the state and have not had these types of issues. So part of why we came here today is to try to get to the bottom of this and try to move forward to how do we do a set of simulations that everyone is going to be, if not happy with, then at least feel like they understood every element of it and had the opportunity to see it.
And generally use a red balloon, not a gray one.
It was red.
It wants to be red. It's difficult to see a gray balloon at especially 3 feet.
It was a red balloon.
Yeah.
Can I ask, before you get to the location, you shed thing, so the balloon is 3 feet, you computer generate a width of how much for, how many pods, 10 feet?
Typically, the arrays are between 10 and 12 feet.
And that's a horizontal dimension,
For the top section where the antennas are.
so you.
So that way.
You computer generate go from 3 feet on a sphere to 10 to 12 feet on essentially a square, a cube, because visually it's a cube, right? I mean, they're all round pods, but they look square from a distance.
They're actually triangular if you look down.
Okay, but they're square from a distance.
From this, yes, you're looking
If
at
you look
just
at the-
like that.
Basically a little rectangle.
Yeah, in 2 dimensions.
And the pole itself is about 3 foot.
And does AT&T intend to, how many AT&T pods would there be on this tower? And how
You
many
mean
pods?
antennas?
The antennas are
Or
levels.
arrays, in other words. So the antennas are these individual,
Pods.
right? You're calling them that, I'm not quite
Okay.
sure, but these are the antennas. They basically look a lot like thin speakers,
Yep.
if you will. So we'll have, I think, 9 at the top. And then if there, you have other co-locators, you'll have other arrays of between 6 and 12, going down in 10-foot increments, down to roughly, usually, it's very rare in Vermont that you would have more than 4. Most of them have about 2, so they would have, let's say, one here,
And the height of the individual antennas is,
about 8 feet.
so potentially 4 times 8 with some space in between is 35 or 40 feet of antennas. So the simulation.
Antenna arrays, yeah.
So the simulation should really not be a single tower with just antennas at the top. It should be that width of the antennas at the top should probably be carried all the way down to 40 feet.
Well, what we've usually done in situations like this is that we show both. Because it could be that nobody else co-locates on this for another 10 years. So we definitely want you to see what it looks like with just one party, but what we'll typically do is if we have a good picture from one location, then we'll also show what it looks like fully loaded, in other words, with everybody.
Whatever the loading capacity of the
Yeah.
tower is, blah, blah.
Yeah, so that's fine. So we will include that, and we also will include, as you requested, sort of a before and after of another site. I'm gonna find a site in Rutland County that I think is.
Yeah, if we could get the coordinates so that I can actually go to the site
Sure, absolutely.
and look at it, or any of us
Yeah.
can.
And could you get Justin one with just your pods, or sorry, your antennas on the top, and one that's been loaded up with other?
Yeah, we'll have to think about that. We'll have to think about, so there may be more than one site that we need to give you to do that, but that's something we can.
Yeah.
And
if that's
again, I have to get permission from you to let me show.
Well, I think what we'll
some
do is,
progress.
yeah.
But you could also have Dave simulate that, right? If you found one with just AT&T on the top, Dave could simulate, load it up with other carriers.
Well, but I think if the concern is really about what does a fully loaded tower look like, we're better off to go find one in the real world and give you that picture as opposed to just doing another simulation.
So to get an idea of the scale, at the dimensions that you've mentioned for the equipment at the top, it's about the same as that window behind the screen. You've got the tower at 3 feet, you've got the pods on either side at 3 feet, and they're about 8 feet tall. So that's generally about the size of that window.
In other words, from bottom to top, that's about 8 feet,
And
about 8 feet in vertical.
And the width as well.
That could be about right. Yeah, my imagination is probably not as good as yours.
Each
Each antenna is only about a foot wide, but the scope of the array, okay?
The
so this
whole
would be
array altogether
Antenna 1, antenna 2, antenna 3. So in that sense, yes.
will be between 10 and 12 feet, depending on what carrier, what antennas, a multitude of factors.
Which again is about the size of that window.
Yeah, that drawing there, rendition, shows 12 feet. I measured it off on their designs, the DuBois and King, they did that one.
Yeah.
And which would be probably
Roughly.
wider than those windows.
So what I'd like to do is actually talk about the location review. You obviously did what we had asked you to do, which we really appreciate, which is to tell us which locations you'd like us to look at. So we have mapped those, and what I have here is I've taken a picture of 8 different, what I'll call them loosely neighborhoods, 3 of which are really US Route 4, but which had some of or had all of the addresses that we were able to find. Dave has his what we call the IBS, which allows you to scroll in and look at individual neighborhoods. So to the extent that there's concern about them, what I thought we would do is walk through what we found for each neighborhood and see if there's any disagreement about it one way or the other. And what we would propose to do in the end is, if we have an agreement on this, we can certainly still photo document from the roads as part of the balloon test where it is that we determined you're not going to be able to see it from. If you can see it from it, then we would take a picture either from the street address, or if you tell us that a landowner is interested in us going onto their property, then we can talk about that in the next session. So does that make sense before any questions before we go into that? Okay.
Yeah, just if you go back a slide, so the pictures from Route 4 itself,
Yes.
do I just see is the upper one that says Route 4, is that the state garage pretty much?
Yeah, the Route 4 neighborhoods, what I consider it is, so basically you've got sort of the lower thousands and the upper thousands, but you'll see it more a little bit later, much more honed in.
Okay.
And we also do pick up basically the areas around this sort of north-south portion of Route 4, which the view shed, again, going back to our 2-mile view shed, show that's definitely where you've got, at least within Mendon, some of the most impact, the most visual impact on that 2-mile view shed. So the one that I think we looked at first was Journey's End, because Sarah and others had expressed concern about that. And what we determined is that I think 397, 463, 465, 520, you won't be able to see it from. But the others you will. And 645 is one that we couldn't find. So obviously maybe we can, like Sarah, maybe we can talk about that one after. I'm not sure why, but we checked on Google Earth, we checked on the Vermont parcel IDs, and just simply could not find that parcel. But again, we can talk about that.
The numbers are there, Justin, I saw them, there's 2 on the same box, it's 463 and
I'll just pull it up on
465.
That's what we were wondering, is
They
that if
share
they
the
have
same.
291
They go
addresses
down
on
one
the-
driveway.
One driveway is split.
I see.
So there is actually a 465.
And is it part of it, or 645?
Sorry, 645,
Yeah.
645 and 6,
And 641? 641 is like one of the bigger, 641 and 789.
643 and 645 share a post.
Yeah, those 2.
Do you want to, let's check.
One of Dave's original simulations was from 646, which is right across the road, but
Yeah.
643 and 5 share, their numbers share a post. So we share a right away.
Can you see 643?
I'm looking for 6, and I'm not sure which property you're.
It's down where it says source at the bottom. It's somewhere there. In fact, it's right over. You'll see one building on the left.
Here.
Okay, that's 463 is right there. And you've got one labeled 397, which I think is the other one.
Yeah, 397, so in other words, it's below.
There's 2 houses together on that road.
Let's do this. Did you plug it in?
Not plugged in.
So bear with me for a second.
It's a driveway, long driveway.
Yeah.
Okay, so that one is 465, 463. That's site address, they have this one as a PO Box 969, that's this big long one here.
But you found 645?
I haven't seen 645.
Okay.
That's off a different road.
But you're not showing any visibility on those lower parcels, correct?
Down,
The round about 397, is that what you were saying before, that you thought it was around?
Yeah, I don't recognize 397. I thought 645
some
was
reason
right
they were off the
somewhere.
top of the screen here. I'm missing the top of what I'm seeing,
Yeah,
but
so this is 641 right
The
here.
projectors needs to be moved in.
this one here,
Yeah, that's 641. We thought maybe 645 is somewhere, is a 911 address on that parcel.
589 there.
Incidentally, I think this is one of the only ones that we couldn't find, so that's in part why I wanted to put it first.
105.
But maybe we can sort this out
Not bad for-
offline, look at some of the others.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So, but that gives you some idea that about half of those addresses do have visibility on Journey's End, and the other half, we don't think you're gonna be able to see. Any questions about that?
Yeah, the little dark circle in the middle is a pond.
On.
Yeah, that's the pond.
And so one of, I have to wade through, but one of your pictures, which shows the pond it's just got the wrong distance up. I mean, when you look at the picture of the trees and the pond and what's not, the distances are off, but you'll correct all that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And moreover, we'll take new pictures.
I think it was number 7.
And it's gonna, and with the location, it may, because of the shift, it may actually become invisible from places where it was moderately visible before. The next one that we have, the next 5 addresses were Cream Hill Road and Old Turnpike Road. And it was our determination that none of those you're gonna be able to see the tower.
Have to go up the road a little farther.
Yeah, it was showing it was.
Up the road farther?
Yeah. And it's-
You wanna check that, Dave?
I'm not sure where that is.
So 535.
There's no.
Is it up here, over here?
Yeah, it's basically, yeah. Gosh.
Oh, yeah, you can't go up on this one, can you?
No, these are just slides that we took. And by the way, I didn't say this at the outset, but I'm happy to provide that presentation to the town so that you have it. But just taking a look.
That's right in here. No, that's, I'm not sure where it is you were looking.
Can you scroll, can you zoom out?
Yeah, you gotta keep going to the right.
Yeah,
To the right.
to the right and
Right
right.
up,
No, yeah,
right up.
right up in there.
Green Hill.
Yeah,
See all those fields?
yeah.
So
Let's just do a 2 mile just to verify.
and when you say it's not visible at 2 miles, but you haven't taken pictures from that.
No, but again, we're going off of the predictive. So the point of a predictive is to exactly that, make a prediction, and then you field verify it once the balloon is in the air.
So if you predict no view shed issues, you're still gonna take pictures.
We can do that, absolutely.
See, on that Journey's End where that pond is, you don't have your yellow going across that pond, which it actually should.
Well, according to
A little bit.
the data, most of the pond, it's not gonna be visible.
Oh, yeah, if you're standing
In the
or
pond.
in the pond, right.
Right.
Because you have it, once you blow it up, you can see it's back on the road where you can see it.
Correct.
Okay,
If you're up in that section.
Good.
For sure.
good.
So, is that,
So, right now, you can see
oh, sorry, Dave, you want to show some?
there's potentially just a tiny bit of visibility over here, maybe through the trees, you might see it. But the fields, it's saying the data, which is actual data, LiDAR data of the area, that it's not visible from here. But that's out to 2 miles.
Can you dial in on 463? Sorry, 5.
Hold on a second.
5
Gino, do you want to check that?
533 Greenville Road.
Is that this road in here?
Yeah, 533.
Greenville Road is the one that.
This, look at 533,
Yeah,
right
that
there.
would be the big
Yeah.
field.
That would be this
So
right
your
here.
data says it's not visible?
Not from the field, you might find, when you get these little
See those little
spots
dots in the
right in
forest?
here, oddly enough, the way the trees over here are falling, or on the side of the hill, whatever it is not gonna be visible from these fields.
I could see it clearly from there. You also, your rendition or whatever computer program, it's messed up down at Hog Penny real bad because it is clearly visible.
I
And
don't know where
Well,
that
I
is.
understand
I mean,
your point, and I think it
it's
makes
in
sense
your
for you to
face.
say, but let's also just remind ourselves, we're talking about making sure that on the next go-round, we have a 140-foot tower at those field verified coordinates.
Oh,
So
yeah.
something's gonna shift.
when we did that walk, there's a hemlock up there that somebody pointed out. That hemlock, that's what I go by. I look at that hemlock. I know that place like the back of my hand. I grew up there.
Okay,
So it is really easy for me to tell precisely where this tower is. And I can see a lot of mess ups.
so let's keep going. And we'll show some of the other places where we do or do not predict visibility.
So I just wanna make sure that, for a property like this, unless we have written permission to be on the property, I'm only gonna take pictures from the road.
I guess that's what we're proposing. I think that the logistical issue becomes, and we can talk about this a little bit later, but we want to go on places where we think that you could actually view the site.
I mean, that particular location, 533 Cream Hill, it's a huge field.
Mhm.
The view shed is apparent from Cream Hill Road, or Wright Road is another town of Mendon road that borders that property as well. So,
What road? This road?
no, you are back one, you are on Cream Hill Road.
Yeah.
This is that
There's
property right there.
533, yeah, that's a huge field
Yeah.
with a vista across the valley that is,
It's in front of Court Jones, right?
No, down here.
no, down the
Down
hill
from
more.
him. There's a
Right
cemetery.
after Wright Road, right after Wright
So we
Road.
have that one already, but that one we can be sure to fully document.
Yeah, so the road, or at the bottom of the field, that is another, that's a public.
By bottom, sorry, you mean south, in other words,
Yeah.
right here?
That road right there is Wright Road, and that's a public right of way, and so
Okay.
is Green Hill.
Okay.
So I can go
Yeah.
to those roads, absolutely.
So can you just clarify, Dave, when you say if you don't have permission, you take pictures from a public right of way, whose obligation is it to get the permission? Is that the town's? or
supposed to
That's
be-
what we had discussed originally with the select board, at the beginning of February.
And the answer is?
I don't know.
Every time we have done simulations and whatever in the past, it is always the simulator who must get permission.
Oh, yeah,
It's not
we're
us that's
we're
gonna
not
build
doing
the
it without
tower.
simulation.
We are not going to do your work.
Well, but understand that this is what we had talked about with the select board, that the select board wanted to control that process. Now, if there's a change in heart about that, we're happy to do it, and we'll document our contacts with the landowners. Again, we're trying to work with the town. But why don't we keep going through, and then why don't we talk about the logistics of that? So the third is Helvey Hill Road and Terra Lane, and on all of those, we predict you're not gonna be able to see it.
Helvey Hill Road. Let's see. That one up there in the corner blue, 299.
Yes.
I have a feeling he's gonna see it
From the road or from his house?
from his house.
Okay.
So, hang on before you.
Yeah. 299 Helvey Hill Road.
I think you had one. Let me just see here.
You're showing that he will see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
From here to the right corner.
Yeah, so that is one that we should look at. when we ran before. Now, I wonder if it's because that may have just been a glitch on how that was.
Yeah, you had one that was visible at, right near
We'll look
that
at those ones again.
438 number.
At 380.
It's either 380 or 430, it's hard to tell.
380 looks like it's probably okay, but 299 is definitely one that we should take a look at.
Yeah.
So I've made a note of that and a couple of the other ones, so this, again, is really helpful. The next ones that we have are Park Lane, and those we show visibility on 125 and 302. And you can see on 302, it's quite clear, and it's because, is this a horse?
It's a
Yeah.
harness track.
Yeah, horse track, so definitely visibility concentrated there. And I think for
And that yellow area, that's,
125,
the yellow area, at the end of the track, that's the barn area.
right.
Yeah.
There's a house
There's a residence.
right by
Residence
that.
here,
Yeah.
and this is the barn here.
Yeah.
So again, we're not showing any prediction at the house, but we are definitely showing it on the track and at the barn.
And no prediction from the road itself? From
No.
Park Lane
You
itself?
want to double check that, Dave? You want to check? You think the road is visible?
You had one from number 2 Cedar Lane, I assume that was at the intersection of Cedar Lane.
This one was.
Hold on one second, we can take a look at all of those.
Your picture number 4, photo number 4 is labeled 2 Cedar Lane. Which there's no residence there, but I assume that was just
Just a
GPS map.
It probably put us closer to the property across the street as opposed to that side of the street.
So that's essentially the intersection.
So that's up here?
Over here or
No,
further
that's
towards the
Route
barn?
4 in Park Lane, probably, go to your left.
It's where all those, small lots
Yeah,
are.
right about,
Yeah,
yeah,
right there.
right in there.
Number 2 should be the corner, the southwest corner.
89 Park Lane.
That's 89 Park Lane there.
We think it's gonna be visible, Dave, pretty much where your 1 mile arc is. There
Right
on
here.
Park Lane.
Right here, we're saying that it's visible, but not visible right on the road.
Little,
Not from the
there's
road?
one like right there, there's a smidgen, right on
You
the,
gotta remember, this is quite a big hill
that's true.
right here.
Yeah.
So, your the property comes up and then goes back down. So you're here, and the angle, you'd have to be considerably high to see over that hill.
So you can simulate from 2 Park Lane, which is essentially,
So this area right through here is what we were looking at before.
yeah,
And the site is actually right over here. It's located on my Google Earth in a different location. But you have this hill here that's blocking a lot of that down there. That's why you see it down here on the road, because you have this valley that you can see through coming down this
30
way.
feet of elevation.
Yeah. Now, there's an app out there that we've used quite a bit that would really help you people, and that is that you can get right down onto the ground with this Google app and look over the contours and see a tower or whatever you want to put there. And we've used it a lot, and man, is it good.
Okay,
It would be nice if you folks had that.
so this is the other area that you were, that Dave was just referencing.
Oh, yeah, it's wide open at the
Right, the gravel pit, basically.
Western.
So Best Western and Mountain Commons. So we'll document it from there, for sure, and along that section of the road.
One of the problems we found was that,
You're right. So 11 Mountain Commons is way up the mountain from this location. That is Best Western over there that you just had your pointer.
This is
on.
Best
That's the
Western here.
Best Western.
Okay,
And, they're individual condos. That is actually Rutland Town.
probably
Town.
here.
probably
Yeah.
now.
Rutland Town.
That's way over
These-
That's 11.
So do you wanna
That's way
find
over
11?
here.
Mountain Commons is up on Route 4, way up the mountain.
Oh, we may have it on the other, on the subsequent site.
I don't know if that
It's
road
also
down there is
visible
Mountain
like that.
Commons Road in Rutland Town.
Let's come back to that one while we take a look at the other, these are sort of the three sections of Route 4 that I picked, or that I sort of clustered together that were on the list. So this is Route 4 in Valley View, 1693, and 1894. And so there's definitely little pockets of visibility along that section of Route 4.
So, and you know that the Town of Mendon welcome sign, that doesn't have a 911 address, but you know where that is.
Yes, I mean, as far as I've driven by it.
Well,
So, yeah. So
The interesting thing, you don't have any yellow at all right where I did that. It is wide open.
I'm trying to refresh here, I lost connection.
You can see the
Internet, yeah.
entire.
So the welcome sign?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is at the bottom, for everybody else, it's at the
Yeah.
bottom portion of that map.
There's a whole swath that should be yellow there. I mean, there is no way you can't see that tower, even if it was only 100 feet tall. Because you can see that hemlock tree right up there sticking up, and it's crystal clear, the whole ridge. Right down where the road goes out of sight on your map, you just go up on the right side of it, it's all yellow.
On the right side?
Yeah, you see where the road goes off your map, on the
Mm-hmm. Right
bottom.
here, yeah.
That's Crosswind Drive.
Everything on that side is yellow, or should be.
Is that Crosswind Drive, Justin?
Yeah,
Crosswind
You're,
Road.
you're talking about,
Orchard Road.
you can
But
see my laptop
Roslyn's house
here,
is
this
a-
area right here.
Orchard.
Yeah, you're on.
Sorry, this is Orchard Road.
If you said that,
This is, that was Orchard Road.
So Joe, that's just-
This whole thing is open.
I'm just gonna add the property lines here.
Nice to hear.
And if you get across into the, well, there's one place you can take from the state building, transportation building, I don't think you need their permission. It's really open right inside where that building is too. But it's also visible anywhere there.
It's just going slow because of the Wi-Fi
Did
here.
it finish refreshing?
But it's coming. It's
Yeah,
coming.
there you go.
But hang on a second, it's gotta recenter.
And just, I'm sure, I think that we probably said this before, but what we're looking at on Dave's computer now is the verified
Correct
coordinates.
location.
Right, see, I was looking at both of them, I figured the one was wrong, but I kept keeping in mind the wrong one and the right one. So anything that I'm pointing out can be seen actually from either
Well,
one.
is this what you're talking about, is right here?
No, it's up there,
Right up here,
let's see, you got, yeah, right in there. Yeah, you got
I
it
don't
right in
believe
there.
that
Goes
you're
right
gonna
to the
see it
road.
from there.
Right here is the,
You're gonna see it
No,
certainly
it's
from
down.
here.
It's all the orchard.
It's down near the curb line.
here's Orchard Road,
Yeah, it's below that.
and the welcome sign is through
But
here.
it's
Right.
totally, it's weird that it's only a little bit of yellow, it should be yellow right to the road and across it and over to the other guy's drive. The whole thing is just totally visible.
Yeah, and so the V-Trans building right here is, that's a state,
Yeah, you won't need permission for
office
that.
building.
Yeah. Okay.
How much of your yellow line is vegetation driven, Dave?
So
Is it all terrain, not vegetation?
it's absolutely both. We have what we do is we take LiDAR data and we make a elevation model, which is if you strip the earth bare and you do that, then we take another set of data which goes to the highest points of everywhere, and you make the difference, knowing that the first one is ground level and the next level is the top, whether it's trees, houses. When the data was taken, if there happens to be a car there, it would make a blocking of the signal. So it's trees, it's buildings, it's signs, it's anything that was there when the data was collected. And it's down to less than a foot. If you want to think of it in a pixel, like a picture has pixels, it's not quite the same, but if you wanna think of it that way, the pixels are less than a foot square, so it's very accurate. So there's, and like right here.
But imperfect, just to be clear.
It's,
Right? It's pretty close. but-
yeah, if you go and cut down a
Right.
forest of trees between when the data was collected and when we're doing this, then yes, that's gonna certainly affect stuff. But you gotta remember, the site is way over here, and this is kind of flat here, and then it goes downhill. The closer you get to the hill, the more of it's gonna be blocked. As you go back further, the more of it will be visible, except it'll be further away. So this area right here is right about a mile.
Okay, right where you
That's what's-
just pointed, that should be a lot of yellow right there, right where that pointer is.
There is a lot of yellow.
Right, see where those two roads intersect, one's called Town Line Road,
Right
the
here.
intersection with Route 4.
Yep.
That is perfectly visible from the Best Western. And it doesn't have any yellow at all.
Okay, that goes on the list. I've got two more. And we can go through them, I think, pretty quickly. Well, maybe. Bear with me for a second.
While you're doing that, Dave, I'll
So this is 4637 Route 4 and the 4840, which is the Killington, the Pico Motor Inn. No visibility at all from our prediction. You want to just double check
I
that?
don't know where that is.
Yeah, you won't have any.
Way up the road.
Yeah, you won't have any there.
Up
You
here?
won't have any there.
No.
Right, okay.
This way?
Okay. Yes, toward Killington, yeah.
Actually, I don't think downhill.
That other
It's got it
property
right up against
that
that
right there.
big knoll.
Yeah, but this is even
This
further
is,
up the road.
this is right, if that was that property, it was
Yeah.
right up in this area.
Yeah, so let's go to the last one then that we have, which is the 5654, 5709, which is the Cortina Inn, and the V-Trans garage. Now, I'm wondering, is that's a
more than-
separate V-Trans garage?
Yeah,
That's further up?
Yeah, so the other
Right.
one was an office building, this is a garage.
The actual garage, okay.
Yeah.
And that's more than 2 miles away.
Yeah, so we predicted no visibility.
I-
Well,
Not
we're
predicting
using
that
your-
far.
yeah, I didn't,
I'm not predicting that far, so
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't think you do
But I
anything.
think realistically, beyond 2 miles, you know,
Yeah.
it's not really, so,
Now, we haven't done
Oh, but
Journey's
if you
End.
go back to that.
oh, we did, that was the first one we did.
Oh,
If you go back to
we
that
did all of
last
Journey's
map,
End?
Yep.
Mountain Common Road.
We
is
did
at the
Helby
bottom
Hill,
of
we didn't do
this.
Journey's End.
So if you're saying that you're
Oh,
2
really?
miles
We did
away,
talk
that's
about
one.
the pond
This
and,
is Mountain
Oh, no, I
Common
mean-
Road right here.
Cream Hill.
Do you want to go to that
No,
one?
Sherwood.
Let's see if we can find that
We
one.
didn't do Sherwood, no.
No, we gotta do Sherwood, that's where we get a lot of views.
Okay.
That's right here is where she's.
Here, wait,
talking
let's
about.
go, so we're gonna go to Dave's
I'm not
computer.
sure where. Let me do this.
Sherwood's next to Helby Hill.
Oh, we didn't talk Sherwood.
Sherwood's got a lot of view.
So we had 11 Mountain Commons Road on our list.
Well, and I think that you had,
Yeah.
that we put it down, but you're saying it's not in the right place, so we could go and verify that one. I thought that-
11 Mountains Road.
Janine, do you wanna just check that on yours?
11, what was the?
Mountain Commons?
So this
This road?
roadway is Mountain Commons Road,
Is that a,
and these buildings on Route 4 are actually identified off of Mountain Commons Road, so
Okay.
right
so
here.
this is a public road right through here?
Uh-huh.
Okay. It probably did not,
So, I mean, right here is 11, so you could just be in that parking lot.
okay,
Okay.
I'm not
Is
sure.
that,
I
is
see
that,
him
is
there.
that beyond the 2 mile?
that's more than 2 miles away.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I see him
yeah,
there
there we
anyway.
That's a 2 mile range from the site, right there,
yeah.
so
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much. I don't think you're gonna see him really.
that's more than 2 miles
But now
away.
you said you wanted us to go back and look at your Helby Hill Road and Sherwood
No,
Drive?
Yeah, Sherwood. It's next to Helby.
Okay,
Before
so,
you leave Route 4 there,
oh, sure,
so the 2 mile radius is that's a 2 mile radius?
correct.
So between there and the left-hand side of your picture where the road turns back to the right a little bit, what, have you taken pictures along that stretch?
Right here?
No, sorry, move your cursor up just a little bit, that next road, yeah, so that's Woodard Road. That's Woodard Road right there, right?
Yep.
Yep.
And from, oh wait, does that say 4? Is that little white spot there out on the highway itself, does that say 4?
That's 4, yeah.
And that's another 4? So from that upper 4 up to your 2-mile radius, are you gonna simulate it, are you gonna take pictures along with the,
Well,
We can, we didn't.
because it's a scenic byway, it's a concern to the towns, because it's a scenic byway, so not just residents, but the entire viewing public would see, but we're curious how it would look from that stretch.
I don't think you're gonna see it from this Route 4.
But we can certainly document it.
Yeah, with all due respect, I drive it 4 or 5 times a day, up and down, and,
Yeah.
as well as 10,000 other people,
Yep,
so you probably should
we will document it.
see it.
So the next location you wanted to go was Sherwood Drive,
Yep.
So that is, let's see, go back to,
right to the top of that map.
yeah, go to the top of the map where, and a little bit over, there's Journey's End, Sherwood is,
This-
Journey's End is down here.
yeah.
So this area,
Mm-hmm.
we've talked about this spot over here. And there are some places, some of these properties will have some views.
So there's that.
Well, we have 618, we know we can see it from, we should,
I don't know where 16, 18 is.
oh, Sherwood?
So that, where your arrow is right there, that is not on our list, that's, or no, that's 618, it was a little bit further
That's
down.
534 Hartwood.
So Sherwood is up here, right? Oh, I see.
Well, it
It's-
goes
it's-
from the beginning
yes,
of the
yeah,
road up.
right. It looks like this one we should look at and see if. Which one? The one right here. Can you find out what that one is? 144 Stratton Road.
Okay, where's Ann Clark?
No, that's not 144 Stratton Road.
No.
Okay?
No, that might be part of the issue. This is not us putting these labels on, this is coming
This is the state.
from the state.
Well, Stratton Road's about 3 miles away, so,
Okay?
Oh, okay, so,
You know,
the
Yeah,
confusion here
You
is,
had to guess.
yeah.
What do you think
I
the
know.
address is?
my guess is that this is the
The mailing address?
tax address to the property.
I'll find out.
It's actually town of Rutland. So, yes, that would be my guess, is that's
Yeah, that might be what
the
it is.
mailing address, not the property address.
I think they had those 4 or 5 houses to the right of where your cursor was,
These,
this side of the road. Yeah, there's 4 or 5 properties right along there. to
Yeah,
the
you
right-
see that
to the
cul-de-sac, right in front of that cul-de-sac is,
They're-
should be
I thought
170,
you had asked us to do Terra.
170 Terra Lane.
that's Terra Lake right here.
Should be 170, he's got a bird's eye view of that tower.
So you're right, the mailing address for that property is Stratton Road, because it's the Pulgar address.
Okay.
And, that's 166.
Is that 170, Jerry?
166 Sherwood.
Okay, 166 got it too, yeah, and 170 should be right there somewhere.
I'm sorry, Will, it was
Is that
162.
170 is that one right there.
It's Terra Lane, isn't it?
Both of those and the one beside,
So this one's full of trees. So,
so
and
that may
just
not be, yeah,
another thing, just to keep in mind that the program is set up for having visibility 5 feet off the ground,
right.
not with your head on the ground and not on standing on the roof of a building. It's 5 foot like you were just standing on the ground.
Yeah, I don't think that one is one that can see it, but you come down to that one and the one to the left of it.
Yeah.
So there are
That one,
predicting some spots along here that it will be visible, yes.
so this particular homeowner has actually contacted the town because they look directly at the mountaintop and can see the blue tarps that are on the mountain right now. Are there blue tarps up there right now?
No, not to my knowledge. I have a brown tarp covering a truck camper, but that's it, no blue tarps anywhere.
Okay.
Or back and check. Maybe somebody stuck them in
I
there.
know, right? No, I was just
I'm
up there
just-
yesterday and
I
it says
just,
Vermont.
you know, that came from an employee of the town, from the homeowner to the employees of the town to me, so I'm just
Okay.
wanna make sure that we're not
No, yeah,
playing telephone and
Yeah.
translating something. 166,
I wrote that one down.
166
Terra
Terra
Lane.
Lane has, issued a concern.
Okay,
Is the post
And
address
one,
in Star-
I have 122 also, I don't know where that is.
122.
Carroll Lane.
And Clark's property is on here.
If there are particular addresses or properties that you want pictures and you want us to control the process, then if you get us a list of that, we can.
Yeah, they don't really know that they can request that information, so, all we've informed the public of is that we're gonna do a balloon test and we're gonna have a public hearing, so stay tuned and watch out for the, information posted on the various websites and our Facebook page. So they don't really know that they can request, oh, I'm gonna stare right at it, I'd like a picture from my house. So,
any other addresses anyone wants us to take a look at?
Okay, we're gonna be up on Sherwood Park. We've got that, Ann Clark's house,
618.
618.
Is that on the?
Definitely,
Yeah, that's on the
That's
on the-
yeah.
visible location,
And she's got a bird's eye view of it.
This one right here.
618 Sherwood, she's on the corner.
Yep, there are some spots there that you would like to see it. Yep.
I mean, you can see her place in her house when you drive up to the forest, so I'm guessing she can look across.
I've got 380 and 438 also.
Sherwood.
380 and what?
And which was the
Yeah,
third?
438.
438, okay.
And it might be on the other side of the road. No, I don't know.
Yeah, there's a P.O. box,
So it could be, it's 243.
so presumably would be a little further up.
Capitol building. Sherwood comes along, comes right around to here, right?
Right. 796.
79.
While David's doing that, Will, you brought up the 2 mile radius. Are you saying, or is what you're saying is that beyond 2 miles, even a 10-foot or 12-foot diameter set of antennas would not be visible?
I mean, visible, but
It
so
wouldn't
indecipherable.
grab
It's just insignificant in terms of an overall visual impact.
So obviously the further away, less visible everything is.
Yeah.
But at 2 miles, is there an industry standard 2 miles for? Is there industry
Most of the
driven by
sites
the
that we work
diameter of
on, it's usually a mile and a half, depending obviously on topography and where you are. By the time you get to 2 miles, it starts to be pretty difficult to see. And beyond 2 miles, it becomes almost impossible unless you're nerds like the three of us and you're constantly looking for towers.
And what the background is, if it's, the highest thing, or if there's land behind it, and, or trees behind it.
Right.
So is that a 2 mile arc?
That one right there is a 2 mile.
So are we down at that's the high school and Home Depot there, going down Route 4, just to
Over here?
orient me? Yeah, that right down there. There's I see Town Line Road, so we're down.
Yeah, so that cluster,
Okay, Home Depot.
this cluster here would be Heritage Hill or the
Yeah,
Gables.
got it.
Yeah.
Got it, thank you.
It will grab your attention even farther down on Woodstock Avenue because you're gonna be staring right at it as you go up Woodstock Avenue, but that's the only,
I don't know what
only reason.
Woodstock Avenue.
And we keep going down on that road
Southwest.
into the city. Yeah, it's right down in,
So beyond the 2 mile range.
yeah, it's beyond the 2 mile. I mean, you'll notice it.
I mean, we can certainly, just bring it down, make sure. Again, I think it is possible for us to do, to take a picture or two, but I'm
It won't show,
envisioning that we're gonna do far better to be focusing on the areas
yeah,
that,
it won't
right?
come out well on film.
That is
And
another.
moreover, I think like what you've said, the more sensitive potential place that we're predicting not visible, but that we need to be sure, is this section of the byway,
Yeah.
as opposed to Woodstock Avenue, which is just more, for lack of a better word, urban, just more dense, more buildings, more stuff to clutter the area. What is unusual about this site is that, and, you know, this is obviously subject to the prediction with the balloon test, but because we are so far away, relatively speaking, to where a lot of the more recent towers that we've been siting, the impacts are much, on the one hand, we get coverage way beyond the 2-mile limit, but the impacts are going to be very much determined by the topography of this area and just where all of the roads and houses, and including which way certain houses are oriented. We're concerned about that, and that's why we agreed to at least talk about this option of documenting for people's residences. So if there's no other addresses, maybe we can turn to that now. I'm cognizant that we've gone well beyond. Together the grant of waiver, and I think that there was a concern about part of it. And I wanted to make sure I understood and make sure that, again, this wasn't just something that we miscommunicated along the way, to make sure that we're on the same page. The way that we've done this in the past, and we have not done this a lot, in most communities we would not undertake this effort, but based on the feedback that we've gotten so far, we feel it makes sense to do here. The idea is that we're going to help document for homeowners to the extent that they even request that. And so there's no reason that a homeowner who knows of a balloon test can't simply take their own pictures, do what you're evidently able to do, and make your own assessment and documentation. What we've done is have our technicians go onto people's properties and take the photo with all the metadata that Dave ended up explaining in the beginning, and then providing to that homeowner a map showing where the pictures were taken and what it looks like. We're not necessarily going to be including all that documentation with our CPG petition, particularly if we don't feel that there's a good reason to. We may decide that there is. So the purpose of these provisions over here is that it's basically becomes up to us of those materials that we get on private land, what is that we're going to use. But certainly the homeowner, if they want to intervene in the case, if they want to come to you guys, if they want to talk to the department, can use all that material. So if we need to clarify this to make that clearer, we're happy to do that. We certainly didn't want to say, we're going to do all this documentation and nobody can use it. We're just saying that we won't necessarily be using that in our own petition. But as to the public lands, or things like the state, the driveway of the state garage, then yeah, I think we're going to include all of that, certainly when we come to you for the public hearing, so that we can do this walkthrough and show you what we found from the balloon test. And I imagine that you're going to want to present something, or some other folks will. So that was the only purpose of that provision. Apart from that, I think what it comes down to and is really how we want to logistically address all of this, and that goes into.
Can I ask one other question?
Sure. Yep.
So on the computer simulation,
Yeah.
The
based
computer
on
view shed, the map, not the photos.
Yeah, I'm back to the photos.
Simulations.
Yeah, so you're gonna provide a simulation of essentially a set of antennas the size of that window, and potentially 3 or 4 stacked, one on top of another.
Correct.
Right. So part of the engineering specs from Du Bois and King's talks about a platform over the generator and all that sort of stuff to break up ice. And
Yeah, you
snow
won't
falling
see
off.
that.
You're not gonna see
That's in the trees. That's 8 feet off the ground.
No, I understand that, but that implies that 140 feet off the ground, there's a lot of ice and snow buildup that potentially could come down. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the necessity of a protective thing on the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in your simulation, can you simulate ice and snow buildup to the degree that the engineers think might fall off it?
I don't think so.
Does that add up?
It actually would.
It would be a little bit like when you guys know.
Is it
storms
a
just as
foot
well as
of
anyone
rime, or is it 2 inches of rime that they?
No,
generate?
it's like 2 inches. Because remember, they're just these flat things in the air. The buildups that you see are on the above 2,500 feet sites, right? When you go skiing, if you go to
Because this
Killington,
just doesn't rhyme up at this elevation.
it just doesn't, at this elevation, it's not gonna do anything. It would be like if you have an ice storm, and yes, it may cake up a little bit, but not, it won't have that
It
rime.
won't.
And if you were gonna make that kind of simulation, you would have to simulate that on the entire hill. You're not gonna get that just on the pole and not on all the trees and everything else. So then it's just gonna be a white snowman.
But I do think what we can do is, in addition to what we had talked about with, providing you some before and afters or some sims plus reality sites that are like this one, we can, and we need to talk about this, so I'm making it as a soft promise, but basically show just a picture of the schematic that you then use that ends up.
The
in
3D
picture.
model?
The 3D model.
I think we can do that.
We can figure out a way to sleep. We did the public notice before in the Rutland Herald. I think it went out twice. Obviously,
Before we get to that,
Yep.
I think we need to decide who's gonna follow up on asking homeowners.
Sure.
My comment would be, this is a time crunch, the select board in the town isn't gonna be able to do that in a timely manner. The next couple of weeks for us are probably out of the question. So if you're willing to do that, I think that's the way to.
So, and that, I think we're probably okay with that. I'd like to just clear it formally with AT&T beforehand.
Sure.
But assuming that they're okay with it, I guess the way that we would propose to do it would be obviously, Tara, if someone has already contacted you, if you could forward that to us, then that's easy, because we probably have an email address or a phone number, we go from there. With respect to other folks, I think the only way that we could really do it would be a letter. And I guess we propose that that letter would go to the folks where we have verified visibility. And then maybe we would either leave to you or deal in a notice with the folks who we don't think it is going to be visible, to ask them to opt in.
This is determined by who?
Well, by us. The
computer
burden's
guy?
on us.
Okay,
So
well, no, because we got different opinions here about what the computer says is visible and what these guys have determined
Right.
is visible. So you're saying according to your list or theirs?
I think it has to be according to our list. I mean, again, the burden of proof is on us to move forward. If you tell us that there's other addresses that you want us to reach out to a homeowner, we can do that. But let me just explain what my concern is. Dave and his crew are only gonna have that balloon, typically that balloon only goes up for about 4 hours. With this, with the volume of people that we're talking about, depending on how many responses we get, for logistical purposes, we gotta make sure that we can actually get this done. Because believe me, if we can't, and there's a problem, then not only, yes, it prejudices us, but you're gonna be the ones who never hear the end of it, is my concern. We'd like to do this so that we're certain that we succeed.
So Dave has compiled a list. You're gonna share that with Sarah, right?
Yeah.
Sarah can share it with his group to see if we.
I'd like to revise it based on some of the things that we talked about today, because we spotted at least one or two, and there's a couple of others that you threw on there. But we can turn that around in the next, certainly for early next week. I imagine you have a lot going on because of town meeting. So my feeling is we'll get that to you, so you can look at it right after town meeting.
What percentage of this location is on private land and how much is on public land?
You mean in terms of the overall visibility?
Yeah.
I don't think we have that percentage pinned down. That would be a difficult percentage to figure out.
I mean, it would just take going through all the properties, within what distance do you wanna do that, and, I mean,
Thinking about the distance of the roads, but certainly it does seem, just from our own sitting here today and looking at everything together, the majority of impacts are on
Is private.
private lands, not public.
I have to excuse myself, I have a sound.
Thank you, I really appreciate it.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah. So does that Does that make sense as a proposal? Do you guys want to talk about it? If you want us to leave the room for a while and go to an executive session, or we're happy to go either way, or think about it.
I think, maybe I can make a suggestion that if they submit the list to us and we feel strongly about a few of the properties that we've already discussed, we'll come back to you and say, we'd really like to pursue these particular properties and maybe not have the big list, but we can shorten it down to some of the properties that they're majorly concerned about.
Okay.
Does that work for you, Justin?
Definitely.
For a reasonable, so what would be, what do you think would be a number that would be like, there's no way that we could go above X number of addresses?
That's some fun.
We can.
What's difficult about it is you can envision that, let's say it's only the Journey's End folks who opt in, then yeah, it's not gonna be a problem,
Right,
even if
'cause
there's
it's not
10, because they're all
fair.
right together.
Yeah.
But if it's
Yeah,
all over.
but I don't think so. I think we're very concerned about the Route 4 corridor, Sherwood Drive, Journey's End. So,
Right.
it's right, we don't know how many people would sign up for it, right?
Okay. Go ahead.
At what time do we discuss other situations of the construction, like the access road, etc., etc.? Is that going to follow after the balloon test, or?
Yes, that's how we would, so when we would come to do a public hearing.
I have a concern about the damage that may be done during the construction.
Yeah.
Try to get to that stage.
Well, I've seen it
Yeah, we're,
firsthand at our place in Germany where they built one about 200 yards from our house.
yeah.
But
No,
that's-
we would address that, and we would talk about things like water bars and erosion control and drainage and all that, once we get to
Okay.
once we get through this process.
You got it.
Come on. You see
Very
this?
good. You see this?
Queen of cookies.
My wife would kill me. She'd find a crumb.
I would take one for the books.
She would find a crumb.
Okay, there's one other thing I'd like to go over for the simulations is, it actually amazed me that those pictures were not pointing at where tower was gonna be either site. I don't know if I have to go around with you guys or what, but you should have it, my camera can do this kind of stuff, you should have a camera that can do this. Right with a computer, you get your site, and then your camera's gonna home right in on the exact degree. You got your degrees right with your pictures, but your pictures are wrong. They're off the pictures, and it's actually hilarious if it wasn't so serious. I mean, you're not looking at what you show for a bearing. So we've got to get that. I don't know, I can go around with you folks if you want and help you out. I've done this.
Yeah, can you let us confer about that? And
Yeah.
definitely, and Sarah can get us your contact.
Because we definitely, when we're taking pictures from now on, we gotta have the pictures in the right spot.
Do you
Now,
wanna
where the-
show an example?
Well,
from
there are several.
I know, just pick out one on what you're talking about.
Or does he wanna email that to us? That would be the other way that we could do this.
Actually, it's short.
Or if you've got,
There are several of them.
there's a logistical concern
This
that I
one-
have.
this one's actually
I wanna make
easy.
sure that we address before we.
The tower would be over here. See, you're supposed to center your photos. And that's an easy one. There's some really bad
So
ones.
ones like this, just so you know, it is not necessarily always exactly in the middle. We take from every area, we take pictures, we take several, and we make sure we get different angles, and we take the one that's the best focus, there's no glare on the screen, there's a lot of different things.
Well, there's
But
like-
it would certainly encompass where the,
It's not in the picture. It's not there.
I'd have to look.
It's over here. It's not even in it. That's not even the right.
I will look at it.
It's this, there's another
Number
knoll
12.
over, there's another knoll over here, and it's on the side of that knoll.
I'll absolutely take a look at that.
Do you got at least?
Number 12.
Yeah, you got several. We actually gave you a list.
We gave you the list,
ones that
didn't
were
we?
off. And that, it
In the
doesn't matter
letter.
which tower, either tower, because the towers aren't really that far apart. The elevation is different,
Right.
but you've now got that taken care of by dropping it
They drop it
in
behind.
180. And I can show you others too. But there's
Question,
I'll go through 'em.
talk
I will
about
go
the
through 'em.
issues of
Yeah,
what
your
you call
bearings are
the
perfect.
number
I
and
like to get your
arrangements
bearings.
on top of the
what
tower.
you say is.
AT&T
your
must
bearings
have
are
similar
exactly right.
arrangements someplace
true
else.
norm.
Is it possible to get a
There's a
picture?
true norm.
Yes, that's what part of what we're gonna do. Yeah, we're gonna show
Make
pictures
sure
of,
To show
here's
the,
what our
uh,
simulations were,
Yeah.
and here's what was actually
But,
constructed.
it's funny.
And what we're gonna try to do is some of,
Should be
maybe
able to-
one
When you're out
with
there pointing, you can say, aha, here we go.
a
Hey,
single
right there.
antenna array, so just tower and
I
array,
will
and then another
go
one that's
through that.
loaded up, that's multiple.
Yeah, that's good to see that.
Yep, yep. Here's the logistical concern that I have about the landowners. I feel like just because of the volume issue that we've expressed concern about, we're gonna need a cutoff. So part of my thinking about March is, we probably, and understanding that you guys, all of you are, volunteers working for the town, that this, there's gonna be a lot of fallout after the town meeting, I'm sure. So just envisioning it, we would want enough time to make sure we have a cutoff for when people can get back to us and opt in with the,
Right.
with the waiver.
Yeah, so your letter to them would be, you need to inform us and
By
sign this
X
by
date.
X date.
Yep.
Giving them at least a week.
That's sort of where I was. I was
Yeah.
thinking if we had a cutoff of a week, and we know there'll be some stragglers and we can deal with that, but
Right.
we can't deal with everybody the day before contacting us.
Right.
Because we'll mess
No,
up.
that's certainly understandable that they have to sign up ahead of time.
Okay,
And then if you all of a sudden get this influx that everybody wants it done, then we can address that at the time and we can narrow down where our priority sites are
Yep.
from a town standpoint and explain to the homeowner that we have to select priority sites.
okay, great.
I mean, right?
Are there town or sort of issues, this is St. Patrick's Day, that's the only thing close to a holiday we have for the next little while. Other than that,
That is a serious holiday.
I don't, I'm not
for me, but for some people.
No, so the select board meets on the 23rd, so we would want to try to avoid that date.
Okay,
But this is to schedule the balloon test, correct?
correct.
The tentative, and again, especially if it's gonna be up for an, considerable amount of time, we wanna get a day that it's not looking to be blowing 9 miles an hour, 12 miles an hour.
Right.
So, you'd have to pick a date and then notice that it's that date or the next
day.
available
When we've done
day.
this, and we've done this dozens and dozens of times, even
That
just in
works
the
great.
last year or two, it works great as long as we're communicating with you, and you'll almost certainly have a list of folks who will be very interested, and we can say, it's not gonna work this day, because, there's gonna be 20-mile-an-hour winds,
Mhm.
and then we just move, either we use the backup date, or if the backup date doesn't work, then we start all over again.
I think the PUC requires a maximum of 6 miles an hour. Otherwise, they won't accept a balloon test, from what I understand.
Who?
PUC, Public Utilities Commission, they're the ones that approve this.
Yes.
And they are God in this state. And there's 3 of them.
I'm not sure I have quite the, but anyway, the point is, let's get it right.
Mm.
Let's get it right, and that way we can have a productive public hearing, which realistically I would think might be sometime, just thinking about it, after your meeting on the 23rd. I'm thinking that maybe do you know your schedule now? In other words,
We'll make it work, whatever works here, we'll make it work.
but I'm thinking toward maybe I'm feeling like this week might be the right week, after your select board meeting, but the week of the 23rd. So maybe if you can let us take that and go back and I'll respond to you, and if that all looks good, and sort of have specific date proposals, as well as memorializing what it is that we would send out, both in terms of the supplement to the parties of record, in other words, the adjoining parties and to the town, and then I think what I should do is give you a proposal of how we would propose to the various owners
Yeah.
the
So,
way.
may I just comment on that too? We've received some, complaints, and they may have contacted you already, but, Chris owns 2 parcels on the mountain.
Mhm.
And so the original, information went out to the adjoining landowners of parcel 1. And it didn't go out to the adjoining landowners of parcel 2, which I think some of them have contacted, your group to complain
There was
about
one,
that.
I think we received one.
Yeah.
And so we were gonna put them as information parties at least.
So, if you could include, because they're like, oh no, I abut that land, because they don't recognize that it was 2 actual parcels.
So the PUC says you look at it parcel by parcel, it's not the same as Act
Yeah,
250.
we understand it.
That's
how it came
okay,
from.
so
Yeah.
we would just put them as an information party and make sure, and frankly, we would do that with others too, who are just interested in it.
Mhm.
Logistically, is this doable?
Yeah, if, as soon as I get the list from you, if I
We'll go
have the
over.
planning commission to go over those addresses,
Yeah.
you're gonna start working on sending out that letter to all of the addresses we just spoke about. So.
Well, I think what we'll do is, again, we'll give you the list, we'll say, we know these ones are visible, here's the ones we don't think are visible. You may push back and say, well, we think, we disagree,
A couple more.
and then we'll figure it out from there.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll be fine.
Okay, good. Yeah, great, well, thank you. I realize it's hard work, and we really appreciate everybody's presence with this, and I'm hopeful that, when we're done, that this will benefit the town, and that folks will be, and that you will feel that we've done our job here properly. So,
Appreciate you
thank
coming down.
Yeah.